Hey, good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Nice meeting you.
Very nice meeting you.
Yeah, I know you through newspaper, and
Okay.
I never met you before, and it's my honor. And thank you for taking an hour with me and go through the leadership. Because for me, I have engineering, about 20 years engineering experience. So in leading people, it's a big thing. And then, working in engineering firms, we work by ourselves, right? But
Yes.
working with people, to lead the people especially, it's not easy. And Mayor, you are very special because you are a doctor.
Yes,
Now,
chiropractor.
yeah, it's a transitions, and you transform yourself from a doctor to a mayor. It's not easy. So I like to learn from you a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say to you actually that there is more similarity to being a doctor and being a mayor than you may think.
Oh.
So for instance, as a doctor, what happens is people come to you with a bunch of problems.
Yes.
And what you have to do is listen to the problems, come up with a way to think about it, to give them solutions to their problems. The difference here is that the problems are far more complex, and maybe not about a person's body, but I think the problem solving that you get taught is very similar. You have to listen, you have to consider all sides, you have to do it, you have to come to your conclusion, keeping in mind what's best for the patient, not for yourself.
Yeah.
So there are similarities in how you attack whether the problem is someone comes to you that has cars are too fast on their street, or their neighbor's dog is barking,
Yeah.
or we have a huge development that wants to go through. There are some similarities actually, and that I fall back on. I find myself doing all the time.
Really? Wow, that's for me it's a big transition. If I'm in this position.
There is a huge transition. I said in my first year, people asked me how was the learning curve, and I said it was pretty much vertical, straight up. There's a ton of learning that has to be done.
Yeah.
But those skills that I was taught in my other profession actually helped, because I'm also dealing with people as a doctor. I'm dealing as a politician. You're very much dealing with people. You're dealing with people as a doctor, not sometimes at their best. They come to you, they're in pain, they're easily upset, sometimes emotionally they're very fragile because pain can do that to you.
Yeah.
Same thing here. Sometimes you're dealing with people that are really at a very emotional state, and it taught you that patience is required, I guess, to be able to listen to someone's story without necessarily judging the person, and listening to the story.
I think the complexity of dealing with the residents' issues is more.
You know, it is. Although in some ways it's more, and it's also some ways a little bit. It's not as personal, because when you deal as a doctor, you're dealing very much with one person, one-on-one.
Yeah.
Sometimes you make decisions here. You make decisions. You have no idea the ramifications that will have on someone's personal level. Especially, for instance, take a subdivision going into a new area, where it really can have potentially affect some people. I often say, every time we vote and we put our hand up, we make some people really, really happy and others really, really mad. So that's the difference. Is that how far it goes out into the community.
Yeah.
Now you asked me to let's see, bump my background a little bit. Is that right? So I've done many things in my life. My family goes back to this part of the world, to the founding of Vancouver, believe it or not. My great-great-grandfather was one of the 3 greenhorns of Vancouver. He owned 555 acres from Stanley Park to False Creek. Makes for a good story, but didn't put any jingle in my genes, so to speak. That family wealth, like many family fortunes, it was seen and then it disappeared during the Depression.
I see.
But it makes for a great lineage. To this area, and I am taken aback by how much Vancouver has changed in the last 150 years.
50 years, yeah.
And I think as I sit here and I look out over the city, what will this look like 100 years or 150
From
years
now.
from now?
Yeah.
And but my background is I grew up in Chilliwack in the hills, and I did many things, many different types of jobs. Before I went to school, I was out of school actually for 10 years before I went back to get my education to become a chiropractor. And I have many different interests because of that. I did a little bit of construction. I did sold menswear at one point. Attempted to sell cars, which I was an absolute dismal failure at. And so I've done many things throughout my life, which I think has been a waiter.
Yeah, waiter. Wow.
Yeah, I was a waiter. That's actually how I paid my way through school, was being a waiter.
Wow, you have a lot of experience, and I think particularly in doing the mayor jobs is kind of different because you have to traditionally, right? Those councillors will go for mayor position.
That's right.
And this is a traditional way.
Traditionally,
But you just
I
jump
kind
out
of
of
bucked
nowhere.
the train. I came out of nowhere. I bucked the trend, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I had done things in my prior
Yeah.
to doing this that I'd learned how to run. I had learned how to run meetings. I was familiar with Robert's Rule of Order. I was familiar with what a chair did. So that part to me was actually running the meetings I find very comfortable. That didn't scare me because I had lots of experience in that. But I did buck the trend. I was, I guess, in the right place at the right time. Politically, it was perhaps the perfect storm, so to speak.
Yeah.
People don't always vote for a person. Sometimes they're voting for change,
Yes.
which is a very polite way of sometimes they're voting against the status quo. So I think I was in the right place on the right side of issues,
Yeah.
and the most likely candidate, and a lot of people took a chance.
Yeah, most of the politicians, when they move into the field and go for competitions, elections, they use the word change. Similar to President Obama and also our retired Mayor Ferguson.
That's right.
When he came on board by 1969 or 1971, became a mayor,
Yeah.
he used the word change. So
That's-
things from your side, from perspective, what changes you're going to do on the city?
Well, I think the changes from the perspective from my point, I have to go back to why I ran in the first place, which was, it's funny what will cause you to run. I think that I identified with many that there was lots of people that were unhappy with some of the decisions that had been made in the past. There's no doubt that our entertainment and sports center was highly controversial.
Yeah.
It did not turn out the way a lot of people planned. We were having to subsidize that choice that was made.
Cash floating. Yeah.
I would also say quite candidly that I went out and voted on that particular day, but only 22% of the population did. And so I would say to people to use that as an example why your vote's important. It barely passed by 51 or 52%. So a few votes are very important one way or the other, and every vote counts. And I would say to encourage those that are young students, for instance, the youth is very passionate about things, yet when it comes time to actually put a check on a ballot box, they don't come out in the same numbers that, for instance,
No.
the senior citizens do.
Yes.
I would encourage people to exercise their right. It's the way that you can have the most effective change. In my case, there was someone in my neighborhood who had asked for sidewalks to be put in on one particular road. When it was upgraded, they were in a wheelchair, I believe, and had asked and felt unsafe going down the middle of the road. And so the city was getting ready to reduce the roads in that area anyway, and they said, let's grant this request. Some new development had been put on, so there was already curb and gutter and sidewalk that had been put in. So they extended that out to, it was a very short little bit of road, and they extended that in. And while they were there, they repaved the entire neighborhood so they didn't have to come back for a long, long time. Which is a great idea.
Was what fix it?
However, about 4 years later, they came by to upgrade the water pipes that were underneath the road.
Okay, then.
So the road had to get dug up
Oh.
within a very short period of time, and my perspective was, I was not pleased, to say the least,
Of course,
because I thought it was so wasteful. Why
Yes.
was it
Yeah.
that we didn't pre-plan to do those pipes before we did the road? I can tell you that after those conversations that I had with the city manager at the time and the general manager of engineering, that I said, this doesn't make sense, that, you know, we should be able to plan better than this. And they actually changed that before I became mayor, but that always stuck in the back of my mind that we can do better. And tax dollars, you know, I worked hard to pay my taxes, like most of us do.
Oh, yeah.
And I think what we want from governments is we don't expect governments to be perfect, but what we want them to do is, like everything else, to learn from our mistakes and to continually improve and continually remind ourselves as to how hard people work to pay taxes.
Exactly.
We have a duty to make sure that dollar is stretched as far as we possibly can.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you always buy cheap, because anybody who buys a pair of shoes will know that, you know, sometimes a good quality pair of shoes will last you a lot longer than a cheap bargain basement pair of shoes is just junk. So sometimes it doesn't mean you always buy the most inexpensive things, but you buy for long-term quality and keep in mind that who it is that paid money in the first place.
Yeah, you look at the new tax, right? Every Canadians pay 52% for the tax. Right,
That's
the
right.
basic one for the 43, and then go for 12% of the BSC, GST, all these things. I think it's not a problem to pay that, but those services from governments, right? The basic services, fundamental services, healthcare, that's important, and I really enjoy it in Canada. Because my my hometown in Malaysia,
Yep.
we do have this kind of service. I mean, you have to pay everything for that, for private service and whatever service that you pay. But here, everyone's equal. It's really good.
Well, you're right. It's a different principle here, but we need to remind ourselves that there's only, at the end of the day, there's federal taxes, there are provincial taxes, there are municipal taxes. On top of all those taxes, there are fees. There's gasoline tax. It's all, you know, there's all these different sales taxes and GST. There's all these different taxes, yet there's only one wallet.
Yeah.
And that from the taxpayer, one taxpayer pays all those different taxes. And I think all levels of government have a duty to make sure that their financial, their fiscal house is in order. And for me, that's a premise. That doesn't always mean that we shouldn't, you know, cocoon and spend nothing. Because what would Canada be without a great healthcare system? Or what would Canada be without fire and police protection? What would Canada be without roads and clean water to drink and a good sewer system? Things we never think of are quite often are the things that government provide.
Yeah.
But again, I go back to, for me, my philosophy is that you have to have your financial house in order first. You have to have respect for those that are paying the taxes. And you have to also consider that you cannot continue to raise taxes faster and higher than growth and inflation year after year. If you do that, pretty soon no one's going to have any money left to spend on the economy. It'll all be paying into the government. So there's a certain point where the scales tip, and you've now reached the tipping point where you get less and less and less return, which is actually a business philosophy. I believe in here.
Yeah.
You know that I can't remember the name of that philosophy, but that's that sort of that yield of return. There's the balances, so you can keep rising prices, and there's that sweet spot where the profit would be. It would be the same thing with people's taxes, their ability to actually pay, where you end up spending so much money, you now actually hurt the economy by having too much tax.
If you want to compare Abbotsford and within this province, how Abbotsford ranks in the
That depends on what area you're in. On average, we are in the, I would say, for the amount of money that people actually pay, we would be in the lower half of the scale, if not lower than that, when you compare our taxes and services to other areas. And people have a tendency to look at just household taxes. You also need to consider that there are certain things like regional district taxes and gasoline taxes. Like TransLink has its own taxation system in Metro Vancouver, for instance. We have the Fraser Valley Regional District out here. But when you compare all of those taxes and fees, or basically another form of a tax in a way, Abbotsford, I would say, is probably on the lower end of the scale. We're pretty conservative here with what we try and do with the amount of money that people pay. And you need to also consider that municipal taxes operate on average at about between 8 and 9% of the overall tax pie.
Yeah.
So we do an awful lot with not necessarily an awful lot of money on the overall taxes that are spent.
Okay, and what inspired you to become a politician? Anything special?
Well, you know what inspired me was, in addition to I think we can do better, is I started to think of my grandchildren and what kind of world we were leaving them, and how I felt that we needed to slow the tax increases down. You know, since '08, the world got turned upside down, and I saw governments continuing to do business as if it was, you know, business as usual, when the world was far from usual. And so I think that the taxpayer out there wanted a break. Now is not the time to be taxing individuals an awful lot. Now is the time for governments to tighten their belt and learn to do more with less. I think that really should be the ultimate goal of every business and every government. Governments will never be a business. It's just not what we do, because we don't make money on what we do. So that's the goal of every business, is to actually make money. But what governments can do is be more business-like, to look for efficiencies in what they do. And so for me, that was it. It's, you know, in chiropractic, it's about that balance in life, right? I often talk about people having their health in balance. This is really not much different. The financial house, your bank account, is one part of having a balanced life. We all know individuals who are workaholics that miss their grandchildren's events and don't have time for their family, and because they do nothing but work. That's not healthy either. You need to have that balance in life, and I believe you know, we need to balance all those things. Like, we could balance the budget tomorrow if we wanted to shut down all the parks, but I don't think that that's what the taxpayer would want. Yeah, we have very beautiful parks and soccer fields and everything else. It goes, I could balance it by shutting down swimming pools, but at the risk of young children not being able to learn how to swim and enjoy those pools. So it's that balance in life that you want to strive there, that quality of life.
And also the future generation.
Future generations. What are we doing for future generations? Not just for ourselves, but what foundations are we leaving for future generations? I think is very important.
And what do you have any political hero in your mind, you know, before?
Oh, geez, you know, I have a lot of them. Winston Churchill would be one. I would say that Winston Churchill was a politician during a very, very difficult time in the world, and especially when you hear the things that he knew that were going to happen during the war, but he could say nothing, because had he said nothing, the Germans would have known, for instance, that they understood that they had the answers to some of the battles, or that they had broken the code in that machine because they'd done it. And so he had to quietly sit back when he knew there was going to be attacks to get ready for the big defensive. But I always admired him. He was a bit of a little British bulldog that always fought, and I thought he was a very interesting character.
Yeah, I think when I was small, I watched the war movie a lot, and about meetings in Georgia. Yeah. And can you please define a leader and leadership?
Oh, that I read this earlier when you went, and being a leader and leadership, that's tough. I think, you know, there's so many different types of leaders. For instance, there are leaders that can lead through fear. Hitler was that type of leader, seeing as I were talking about the Second World War. He led through fear. those types of leaders have a tendency not to survive very long. And then there are those leaders, I think, that try and encourage others to do what's right and try and build a team where you get people to do what instinctively they know they should, what our moms taught us to do, how to play well with others, and how to reach into yourself and do your own personal best. You know, I remember my grandfather telling me, I don't care whether you win or lose when I was playing sports, as long as you did your best. And I think that that's that type of leadership that encourages others to do that. And for that, part of which you have to lead by your own example. I think back to a time when I had many, many different jobs, and what kind of bosses did I enjoy, and what bosses strive me to work hard. The ones that, and I try to remember that and try to encourage other people to do that. So that's part of leadership. I think leadership also is setting the goal. The mayor doesn't do that by alone. Mayor and council actually help direct policy and then define and help leaders. Some people say that actually the true leader of the organization is actually our city manager, because he's the one that has the most closest interaction with all of the employees. Mayor and council actually deal with the city manager and senior management of a city. So it depends on what you think true leaders are. And there are many, many different types of leaders. Sometimes leaders can be just someone I think we all have leadership skills within us. And some of us just get chosen to be in leadership positions for a short period of time. We'll see how long my time is.
What leadership elements that formulate a man to be a good leader? Any elements that you think of?
I think vision.
Vision.
I think listening.
Listening, yeah.
I think being able to actually make a decision. It's probably the most important. Is somewhere along the line someone has to say, okay, I've listened to the pros, I've listened to the cons, we're going to do this. And again, mayors don't always do that. This would be mayor and council, because there are times where council has given me my marching directions, and I don't always necessarily agree 100% with the decisions, every decision that council makes. But my job